Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Do you remember this scene?
4 weeks. 20 papers, that's $2 plus tip.
There's a non-zero chance that even if you haven't seen this movie in 40 years, you remember Johnny the Paperboy, along with several other memorable scenes in the 80s classic Now, I recall this movie being on TV a lot back in the day, as well as One Crazy Summer, which had some of the same cast and the same director. Both films were basically on constant rotation. Better Off Dead was released in October of 1985, and the last time I watched this entire film was probably a few years ago, but watching it again for this review, I picked up a lot of small details and interesting facts that I did not pick up the last time I saw it. The film stars John Cusack as high school student Lane Meyer, and at the time when he made the film, he was 19, so at least he wasn't too far off, like freaking 30 years old playing a 17-year-old. And instead of walking you through the plot, I'm going to talk about all the characters in the movie, and why I still love it. Pretty much every character in the movie is interesting in some way. And let's just start with the main family, the Myers. Our main character Lane kind of goes against type for these type of 80s teen movies. He's not portrayed as a nerd, and he's not a jock, but he already has a really hot girlfriend who he's obsessed with. That is, before she dumps him for the typical 80s jock bully. But besides his eventual love interest, who I'll get to momentarily, and his dad, Lane is probably the most normal character in the entire movie. Speaking of Lane's dad, Al, in these types of movies, the dad is usually a bit off or weird or harsh, but Al seems just like the most level-headed, normal, intelligent person in this family, as opposed to Lane's mom, Jenny, who's a complete kook. She's always cooking crazy-ass food, she nearly kills Lane, and she's just off completely. And to round out the Myers family, there's Lane's little brother, Badger, who's basically a mad scientist that also likes trashy women and doesn't say shit for the entire movie. Next, I want to talk about Lane's neighbors, the Smiths. Mrs. Smith is the typical 80s annoying neighbor. She's loud and obnoxious and overprotective of her son, and apparently she's a widow. And speaking of her son, we have to talk about Ricky. Yeah, something I didn't realize until rewatching Better Off Dead today. Dan Schneider played Ricky, and Ricky is a total creep for the whole film. I mean, maybe Dan Schneider just played himself, allegedly of course. And oddly enough, Dan Schneider might not even be the most notable connection to Nickelodeon in this film. And who is Ricky creeping on this whole movie? Monique, the French exchange student. It's bad enough that Ricky's mom is trying to force them into a relationship, but Ricky also being a creep just makes it even worse. Monique ends up being the love interest for Lane, which causes a conflict between her, Ricky, and Ricky's mom. And she's also the other non-weird, goofy, or eccentric character in the movie. Now, every teen comedy has to have a bully. And in the 80s, that meant good-looking blonde asshole. Which leads us to the character of Roy Stalin, played by Aaron Dozer, who, for whatever reason, I assumed had more acting credits than this film, but he really only has 2. So if anyone knows what happened to him, let me know in the comments. But anyway, he plays the jock ski team captain that steals Lane's girlfriend and bullies him for most of the film. He's also the guy that Lane has to defeat at the end of the film to prove himself, in typical teen movie fashion. Another staple of these films is the funny best friend, and in Better Off Dead, that's Curtis Armstrong as Charles, but he'll be forever known as Booger from Revenge of the Nerds. He has a long IMDb, and another one of my favorite characters that he plays is actually Snot from American Dad. And finally, there's Lane's ex-girlfriend and obsession for about half the film, Beth. She's the reason that Lane is constantly trying to take his own life and feels he needs to prove himself by defeating Roy on the K2 ski slope. Now, those are all the main characters in the film, but there are a couple more that show up several times that I need to speak on. First, the 2 Asian street racers.
The crowd swell with anticipation as the lights turn green.
When I was young, I absolutely loved it when these 2 dudes showed up in this film. Seemingly anytime Lane was in his car, they were stalking him, ready for a race. They had a bullhorn installed on top of their car, and one of them talked like Howard Cosell, and the driver didn't speak at all. But I'll let Lane explain it.
Two brothers, one speaks no English, the other learned how to speak English from watching the wide world of sports. So you tell me, which is better, speaking no English at all or speaking Howard Cosell?
I don't know how the director, who also wrote the film, came up with this bit, but it's fucking hilarious because it's so random. It honestly leaves you with more questions than answers. Where did they come from? Why do they keep targeting Lane? Why are they Asian? It's just funny. The other reoccurring character is the one I started the video with, Johnny the Paperboy. You gonna pay Johnny what you owe, well he's gonna take it out your ass. Or at least that's the way I read the situation. Johnny's hilarious because he's basically a thug, but he's also a paperboy, and he collects his money like a loan shark, who seems to show up totally at random throughout the movie. He's even in the very last scene, right before the credits roll, coming to collect his money. I'm pretty sure Johnny grew up to be a pimp or something.
Gator don't play no shit. You feel me? Gator never been about that. Never been about playing no shit.
You know, I mentioned the writer-director of the film. His name was Savage Steve Holland, who also wrote and directed One Crazy Summer the following year. Curiously enough, he got his start animating the whammies on Pressure Luck.
Stop. Oh.
Those whammies were easily the best part of the show. So why do I still love this movie after 40 years? Well, it's almost like the perfect blend of 80s teen comedy and goofball comedy from the 80s. Kind of like Ferris Bueller's Day Off meets Airplane. Take the classroom scene for instance. Instead of it being a realistic depiction of a class like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the class in Better Off Dead is absolutely captivated by the math teacher, who's spouting a bunch of gibberish by the way. They can't wait to show their homework, and they're disappointed when class is over, which actually makes this entire scene really smart and kind of hilarious. There's an entire scene with an animated singing and dancing cheeseburger that seems to fit the film perfectly. I really believe Better Off Dead has everything you want in an 80s comedy of this type. I'm honestly not sure why so many critics and audiences disliked it back in the day, because it's definitely one of those films that became a cult classic years later, likely because of its extensive cable run. So let me know if you've seen Better Off Dead, and if you like it as much as I do, or if you've never even heard of it. And before you ask, I will eventually get to One Crazy Summer. I originally planned to talk about both these films at the same time, but it ended up being just a little too much work. So no sweat, I'll get to it pretty soon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll be back real soon.